bashful. Every time I go see you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome you all out tonight to the McClure Historical Society, right? Kind of, rather site. I always say the McClure Historical Society I'm kind of envious of because they get together and have a really good time without all the work of owning a historic site and trying to maintain it and grant money and all that. So I don't know if you know how lucky you are, but you are lucky. You get to come together and enjoy history without all the extra work. My name is Taylor Moyer. I'm really excited to be here. This is my 4th time being here at the McClure Historical Society. I am right now serving my 1st year as the senior humanities teacher at Toledo School for the Arts, and then I'm also in my 1st year there as their American history teacher for a couple periods, those darn sophomores. But predominantly I'm spending my time up here in Toledo now teaching the seniors, so it's an exciting time. Further back, though, my history or my journey in history education began in 2002 when I became an active member of the Historical Society, which is kind of interesting considering I was in the 7th grade and I wanted to teach like older people about history. So I started scraping windows at the Dr. Bloomfield house when they just acquired it. Remember what I said, don't acquire buildings, they're way too much work. So I was active with that, doing all the grunt work and everything, and then later on in 2003, the bicentennial of the state of Ohio, I decided I wanted to spend a lot of money on really expensive out-of-date clothing and become a reenactor and dress in old-time clothes. So I've been reenacting and doing living history for quite a while now, since 2003. So outside of that, you might have seen me at the Henry County Fair. I do a lot of reenacting over there at the log house site and schoolhouse. And then tonight I'm going to be talking to you about kind of a newfound passion, and that is the Miami-Erie Canal. I'm not going to go into potentially as much railroad history as what maybe some people are thinking. I'm going to go right up to railroading history and how it kind of knocks the canal out of use here in Northwest Ohio. So they're going to be the two dogs in the ring fighting each other, and the railroad's going to win. Spoiler alert, sorry. So I kind of have a unique background with the canal. I'm going to present a lot of information, and if I sound like I'm talking like I've been there or I've lived it or I know, it's kind of a unique experience. This last summer I worked on the only existing piece of the Miami-Erie Canal still in use, and that was in Providence Metro Park over in Grand Rapids. So I spent 3.5 months on a canal boat with a bunch of ladies working. I was one of 2 guys that were hired for the season. The rest of them were all women. I don't know, I guess ladies like to play dress up in costume, and not many guys are interested in it. So if I talk like I've been on a canal boat a time or two, it was kind of my thing there. I always said that I spent more time over my summer living in the 1870s and talking to people like I was from the 1870s than what I actually did this summer not living in the 1870s. I worked 5 days a week, so it's kind of weird. So people bring up any issues with like slavery or anything, it was always kind of awkward because I'm talking like from the time period. So tonight we're going to be looking at a few things, and by the end of the evening you should be able to hopefully have a better understanding of how the Miami-Erie Canal influenced the development of Northwest Ohio. So that's the major thing you want to take away from tonight. The second thing you want to take away is kind of how the canal was responsible for the economic development of Northwest Ohio. So there's 2 factors the Miami-Erie Canal gives us. That's population growth and economic wealth and growth. So largely and historically, we see where the Miami-Erie Canal is largely like undersung. If you check out a history textbook, or if you remember when you went to school here in McClure, before they tore your school down, right? You might have seen in your history textbooks like a paragraph on the Miami-Erie Canal, and it usually goes something like this. Some Irish and German workers dug the Miami-Erie Canal from 1825 to 1845, and the railroad replaced it. Okay, thank you. Profounding impact on my education there. So hopefully today you'll get a little bit of insight into actually why that one paragraph is in your textbook, and you'll be able to stand up for the canal and give some information. So when we think about the canal, we often picture possibly the big ditch that's alongside the highway out here. the old 24 now that's been replaced, right? So the Miami-Erie Canal itself was dug in 1825 through 1845. Construction started down towards Cincinnati and would also start down towards Toledo. The end goal in the process here was, let's unite Toledo and Cincinnati for transportation purposes. We want to be able to ship people and ship goods. We want to be able to make a profit off of it at lowest cost possible. So the state of Ohio set a budget aside, and lowest cost possible would cost the state of Ohio $8,062,000 and some spare change, I think about 7 cents. In 1825, $8 million is a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And the residents of the state of Ohio were like, how dare you spend that much money on transportation? Might sound a little reminiscent of today a little bit with some of our taxes for our roads and everything. So when the canal ends by 1913, they are in severe debt. They were barely even to pay off the initial construction. And you're going to find out by tonight why it was such a detriment to our banking and why the state of Ohio simply did not afford the canal any longer. So the Miami-Erie Canal, when it was completed, ran 274 miles from Toledo to Cincinnati. There were a lot of key elements and factors that had to link together to make it successful. The geography being one of them, along with some of the other issues that were going on with the state of Ohio at that time. We were the Great Black Swamp. So it meant that transportation was pretty much unavailable unless you were walking or riding a horse, and then in which case your shirt was like caught in the thistles and the trees because it was a forest area. So they wanted to clear it, and they wanted to make sure that they had a way to transport people in. Well, we have the fantastic Maumee River, and we have the Ohio River, which are excellent resources when it comes to water. So they dug the canal, and it runs directly along the side of the Maumee River. I'm going to pass out some little handouts of the map for the Miami-Erie Canal here, so you can take a look and kind of know what I'm talking about. You can take one, pass it around. Kind of looks like a brochure, so if you want to hang on to it and go for a ride sometime on the canal, you'll have your map. So as the map's kind of coming around, you're going to see where Toledo is up in our upper corner here. That would be the northeastern side of the canal, and then down south we're going to have Cincinnati. And the route of the canal is outlined in the darker black. And with that, you can see there are smaller tributaries and rivers that branch off and feed as a feeder for the canal for its water system. So our first river we have is our fantastic and oh-so-clear Maumee River. The Always River, which forks into the Maumee River at the confluence of Defiance. And then we have the Laramie or Laramie Reservoir, which served as a water input for the canal. Mad River down into the Ohio River. So as the map comes around, you're going to see that if you were to board onto a canal boat, you would be asked a number of things upon your arrival onto a canal boat. And the first one will be, where do you want to travel to? So if you take a look at your map, you're going to see that all these points of destinations were the typical spots where you wanted to go. Toledo, Napoleon, Defiance, Delphus, St. Mary's, Sydney, Lockington, Piqua, Troy, Tip City. Tip City was known for having some of the best brothels and bars along the way. So gentlemen, we'll talk about that later. Dayton was a large hub of activity right down through Middletown, Hamilton, and Cincinnati. So lots of really exciting and unique places. The canal, once it was constructed, many cities would be able to pop up around the canal. One of them, of course, was Napoleon. And I know you're saying, well, we're in McClure. Talk about McClure. Unfortunately, McClure is not a canal town. It doesn't really exist yet when they complete the canal. But Napoleon did, platted in about 1832. So I have some images of Napoleon during the canal era that I'll be sharing. But I want to kind of not get too sidetracked here. I want to make sure that we kind of hammer out some of the background of the canal itself and its function. So when they built the canal, they had a few issues when it came to transporting goods on the canal. And first and foremost, on the way from Toledo, headed towards about Dayton, the topography or the lay of the land actually goes uphill. So So if you're coming from Toledo, they decided we need to get the boat elevated with the water level so it can continue on. So they built canal locks. And the first canal lock number 1 is was in downtown Toledo. And it elevated the boat 2 feet. 2 feet. And then once they hit a section called Side Cut Metro Park, which is right in Maumee, Ohio, there were 6 locks there because they needed a side cut to get through the hills that were in that area. So side cut served as a point to where they could get elevated again as they made their way towards what was called Providence, Ohio. Providence, Ohio sits right on the outskirts of Henry County, Ohio, obviously, close right here, right? And it's up towards Grand Rapids. Providence, Ohio was a fantastic canal town. It boasted 5 hotels, a brothel, gotta have a brothel, the Isaac Ludwig Mill, and a church that was built there. The church still stands today. In all, has anybody been through Providence? You probably didn't realize it. Providence, yeah. Providence in the canal era had around 500 to 600 buildings. 3 of them still stand today. The Isaac Ludwig Mill, the church, and a house built by a gentleman named Peter Minor. So Providence was a neat place just before you came into what was called Texas, Ohio. But Providence had the first canal locks coming into Henry County. And canal locks are a very unique system that were developed to raise and lower the water level for the boats. Pass it around, take a look at that. I printed off kind of the system for the canal locks. Providence, Ohio today, that canal lock still functions, and that was the canal lock that I worked on over the summer. Kind of a unique experience. It seemed like a really fun thing, and I really thought I would enjoy it, but I'll tell you what, locking through a canal boat time after time after time is pretty annoying, and it's a lot of work. So the people on the canal that did these jobs certainly probably would have hated their lives for the vast majority of the day. The canal locks served a number of functions, either going up or going down. Typically, the average elevation difference was about 4 feet to 5 feet. The lock in Providence is about 4 feet lift or lower. So the first thing that you had to do was get the boat into the lock. Well, this is an interesting feat because the locks are actually limestone. And all the lock stones that you see in Defiance, because there's a lock still at Independence, and then there's the lock in Providence, all that limestone comes from a place called Marblehead, Ohio. If you've been up around Marblehead, there's a lot of stone there. There's a lot of limestone there. So they would quarry it and ship it down on the Maumee River on barges. Once it came to the location, the Irish or the German workers, which are the people who were predominantly digging the canal, would set the lock stones in place. So they would set those in place, typically with basically winches to lift them up. The canal lock then itself was an interesting feat for getting a boat in because the canal boats usually range between 30 feet long to 80 feet long and just 14 feet wide. The canal lock itself is 15 feet wide, which means the guy on the back driving the boat by himself, he has to get the 14-foot boat into a 15-foot span. So he's got about 5 inches or so on each side. So when I was in Providence this summer, yes, I drove the canal boat, and if you're wondering, of course, yes, I crashed into the canal lock many times. So interestingly enough, I will admit though, I never ripped the door off the side of the boat, which one of our female drivers did do once, and it left all the paint on the side of the locks. It might seem funny, but interestingly enough, each canal lock had a lock keeper, and the lock keeper's job, first and foremost, was to direct traffic. Because the state of Ohio, in its peak season of about 1870, had registered about 2,000 boats on the Miami-Erie Canal, which meant there were usually about 2 boats per line. That's a lot of traffic. So these boats would get locked up at the lock, backed up, and they would fight. It's commonly documented that captains of the boats would use what are called pike poles. They're about 14 feet long, and they're used for piking off the bank to try to swat the other crew off the boat to try to tangle up their line so that they could get their boat into the lock. Interestingly enough, if you bump into the lock with the boat, it's a $15 fine for bumping into the lock, which might not sound like a lot, maybe it does. The only problem is a gentleman like myself, typically, a day's work, I would make $2 a day on the canal. Ladies would make about $1 a day. So a $15 fine would be really, really detrimental to my life. I would not want to give up $15 for bumping the locks. So the locks themselves are a unique engineering feat, and they work all off of gravity. And I'm going to say it again, they work all off of gravity. I can't tell you how many times I've gone through this, and people say, well, where's the electricity coming from to pump the water in and out? Electricity doesn't really exist yet in these areas out here in Northwest Ohio. So I'll pass this around. I apologize, it's so small. But this is what is called a Whaler gate. So those big wooden gates on the end that you see, those are Whaler gates. Inside the Whaler gates, people aren't really too knowledgeable of this because it's below the water line. There's two what are called wicket gates, and they're actually about the size of a washboard. Any ladies familiar with the washboard? So these wicket gates are about the size of my washboard here. And once the boat is locked into the lock, you would sit your body on the Whaler gate and scoot out across the water, and you would turn two large handles and would flip the Whaler gate. And that is what would create the surge of water that would either fill up or lower the lock. And that was all dependent on which direction you had your boat facing. So down here, the water's lower. If you turn these Whaler gates, the water's going to lower. The water's higher over here. If you want to fill it up, you're going to open these Whaler gates over here. Okay. Makes sense. Okay. So once those Whaler gates were open, the water level would go up or down. Now the only issue is it creates a surge, so if you were to fall actually into the lock, it would suck you down. So when you're sitting out on these Whaler gates, you really don't want to be monkeying around too much. And you can imagine in Providence, when we have the ladies in their nice dresses and they're scooting out on these Whaler gates, you don't want to get caught on anything. The bottom of the lock itself is about 19 to 20 feet deep, solid limestone all the way to the bottom. The canal itself, where the boat actually travels, is 4 feet deep. So if you fall in, you can stand up. If you fall into the canal lock, you're going to die. So kind of an interesting compromise. My most interesting side story, I will tell you, I drove the canal boat in the one day, and there was a mom of her baby ducks that got into the lock before the boat did. And I told you how much room's on each side. And the mom took her babies between the boat and the limestone wall. And once we hit the Whaler gates, the boat suctions to one side, suction to that side, and they were able to go down. And they popped up out the front of the boat, and the crowd was like, yay! Meanwhile, we were all offended because we thought that was going to be supper for the night. So I'm going to pass this around so you can take a look at those Whaler and wicket gates so you can kind of see how those operate down below the water line there. So the locks are kind of an interesting feat, and I kind of brag about it because, you know, the engineering behind it, there was a huge amount of engineering. The people who developed this were really smart. But interestingly enough, they're working off of gravity. They're working with, you know, what the land gave them. Topography, water, and some gates. It's really nothing more than that. The only canal lock still left in Henry County sits just on the Henry County line, just down from us here, and it was called the Rice Lock. I'm not sure why it's called the Rice Lock. I would assume there must have been something to do with rice there. The only thing I can attribute to today is the lock is disintegrating like rice. This is a corner of one of those lock stones where the boat would have come in. Yes, it's been re-glued together because it's just disintegrating. So this is one of those lock stone pieces from the only canal lock still left in Henry County. It's in pretty rough shape. If you ever drove past the canal lock in Providence, that's always something to brag about, especially from us here from Northwest Ohio, because there were about 173 canal locks on the Miami-Erie Canal. The one in Providence is the only one that's still in operation. It's the only one that takes in boats and passengers in the entire state of Ohio. So it's really a one-of-a-kind kind of treat here. So once you pass through those canal locks, you would have arrived in Napoleon, Ohio. Yay, we're here. And I have some unique images here that kind of show what Napoleon would have looked like during that time period. This is downtown Napoleon. Snyder Chevrolet is right over here. The yellow building that leans on an awkward, kind of tilt, and it looks like it's about ready to fall over, has this building right here. So that'd be one of the oldest buildings in downtown Napoleon. And 24 that you'd like to drive across is actually the canal in Michigan. So you can pass that around and take a look. To the back side of the image, you're going to notice there's a mill in the background. And I'm going to get into some milling history here in a little bit and how the canal would bring that economic wealth. Some other photos from the time period of Napoleon and his development with the canal. This photo here is looking east from the top of the courthouse. Right in the center of the canal here would pretty much be Hawk's Pizza. Right back in here. This is the Center for Child and Family Advocacy. And the back, you can see the Sheriff's Department right here. So you pass that around and see the canal there too.
How wide is the canal from Cincinnati?
So the canal fluctuated in width, but predominantly the state of Ohio tried to maintain it at about 40 feet wide. And you did have two-way traffic on the canal. So, and I'll get into that a little bit when I get into, right now, how the boats looked and how they were powered. So the boats themselves had many unique designs. There's not a whole lot of blueprints left, but I did manage to find this one and make a photocopy. So this is a standard kind of packet boat. This is what would ship goods, animals, and people. So it's kind of a catch-all when it comes to canal boats. And it has separate rooms on it available, but predominantly when it came to transportation for people, you would be on boats or want to be on boats that were totally enclosed, just like this one here. And those boats lived in a time period where max capacity and fire hazards didn't really exist like they do today. So typically speaking, these boats were meant to house about 70 people, but what the heck? If you're a canal captain, you can make a few extra bucks, why not just jam pack it with as many people as possible? That also means that you might sell the bottom of the boat out for a higher price because you're going to have a roof over your head, and then we'll discount it so you can sleep up under the stars, which also means passing through Northwest Ohio, what's going on outside, you might get your discount ticket at a high cost of sleeping outside in the rain. So kind of unique, yeah, and mosquitoes, definitely. So I'm going to pass this around so you can see the layout design of a standard canal boat. On the back side, that's our destination. That would be downtown Cincinnati with the canal cutting through the center in the heart of downtown. It's really, really a neat photo. So take a look at that. I will also pass around the image of the passenger boat here. So most of the boats passing through Toledo to Cincinnati are going to be passenger boats in the early history. 1845 through about 1865, there's going to be a lot of passengers coming into Northwest Ohio. And what are they coming for? Land, good farming. How many of you are farmers? I'm sure there's a lot of farmers out here, yeah. So they're coming out using that canal boat as their resource for transportation. Eventually, once people come out and they build their homesteads, they're going to need supplies. So with the boats that are going around, you'll notice there's no big dual engines on the back. You're not going to be putting this boat in the Maumee River going skiing or tubing anytime soon. So it needs power. And the power that was given to the boats were, well, horsepower or mule power. Most of the boats were actually pulled by mules, not horses and not oxen. You do see that a little bit, but typically mules were pulling the canal boats. There's a lot of reasoning behind why mules pull canal boats, and they're pretty much the right fit. Mules are half donkey and half horse. So that means that they are going to be able to kind of meet in the middle when it comes to being too fast or too slow. Mules are also extremely intelligent, and the saying, stubborn as a mule, does not come from like being stupid. It actually comes from the idea that mules will not do anything that they don't want to do. So if a mule knows that water is contaminated on the canal, which it was contaminated frequently, people will get sick, the mule will not drink it. And the owner would like push its head in the water and be like, drink this water. And the mule would refuse. So they would be stubborn. Mules were extremely intelligent, and they knew if they were tired, they're going to sleep. And if you're going to beat them, you're going to beat them to death because they're not going to move. So, really smart animals. They're the right speed. What's the right speed? The canal boat in the state of Ohio, they kind of set a precedence after some really bad accidents when they were trying to figure out how to maneuver these boats around. 4 to 5 miles per hour is fast enough. That's fast enough. And they also believed, after conversing with doctors during the time period, 4 to 5 miles an hour is all more than the human body can withstand. If you go any faster than 5 miles per hour, it's going to be very, very damaging to the health of the human body and the human condition. So, slow down on your own roads, folks. Going way too fast. So the mules were maintained and operated by a young boy, probably about the ages of 8 years old to about 15 years old. That's right, this 8-year-old boy is responsible for these big mules and all the lives of these passengers on the boats. So they would be called the hoagie, and that's kind of, you know, when you hear a hoagie or a hogan, that's where that term kind of comes from. And a hoagie was paid about 3 to 4 cents a day. That's a pretty good average price for a young man. And at about the age of 15, he would be able to aspire to hopefully moving on to the boat to do more hands-on physical labor. Job of a hoagie, they would wake up at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, feed water to the mules, get them hitched up to the boat, and you'd be ready to go. Some passenger boats ran 24 hours, which meant that they had first and third shift. There was no second shift. There was no labor laws during this time period. You're going to work when we tell you to work. So first and third shift would operate the boats throughout the nighttime, which meant on the front of the boat they would hang 2 lanterns, on the back of the boat they would hang another 2 lanterns, so you could see at nighttime by candlelight. I don't know how it works going into the canal locks at that time. Other boats were daytime hours, so they would operate from sun up to sundown. So when the sun came up, you had to get moving. On the boats, you paid per mile. You paid 3 cents per mile. That was your fee. And 3 cents per mile was a pretty good average cost during that time period. And the railways, when they come in, are going to kind of steal a lot of business, and they're also going to be a lot more expensive. They're going to charge about 13 cents per mile. I don't know about you, but that's way too expensive. Just way too much. So, when passengers paid their 3 cents, they also got some other amenities with that. First off, laundry services. The canal boats all offered laundry services, but the railroads did not. The railroads did not. So ladies aboard the boat would be responsible for largely 3 things: cooking, cleaning, and taking care of children. So that's another reason why they made a little bit less of a payment. So the water that was used for doing the laundry was pulled off of one specific side of the canal boat. It came off to the side where the mules were, and that's called the towpath side, because they're towing the mules on that side. The opposite side of the canal that we drive on today, where the highway is called the heel path side. Towpath, heel path. The reason they had to keep the water separated was because during that time period there was a large common belief that water would stay separate if it was clean or if it was dirty. So if you are going to pull your laundry water, you're going to pull it off of that heel path side. It's clean, do your laundry, dump it on the towpath side. Okay? Then you're going to turn around, if you're drinking or cooking water, you're going to take it off the towpath side, use it, do your cooking, your cleaning, drinking, dump the dirty water out. This is a problem. There's no outhouses aboard the boats.
No.
So many of the boats had chamber pots. So you would be using a chamber pot that everybody else had been using. You ladies, if you were feeling a little shy, you could go up on the captain's deck and they would hold up their aprons typically for you so you would have some privacy to relieve yourself. Gentlemen commonly went down on the deck. Now, like on the deck and in the chamber pot, they would just do what they needed to do. When it came time to empty that chamber pot, you emptied it out on the towpath side of the boat. So, as we know today, dirty and clean water just mixes up to make a whole lot of dirty water. So, when you were putting your cup down on the boat on this side to pull out that clean water and you were drinking it, Johnny over here just dumped all this extra. This also was a problem which I experienced, and I did not believe this. I thought this was a whole bunch of baloney, that people would really get motion sick on the canal boat, until I worked on the canal boat this summer. And I was shocked and appalled at the amount of people that would get motion sick on the canal boat. I couldn't believe it. We're going like 4 miles per hour, people. I get motion sick. Just hang on for the ride, I guess. So people would get motion sick still today on the canal boat, and they would throw up. Well, they would throw up in a bucket, and we would throw up over the boat, just like they did back then. So now we're washing your clothes, cooking and cleaning for you, and now you're going to drink that water. So a lot of boats got like horribly sick during that time period. Cholera was a huge outbreak on canal boats. It would wipe out whole towns. That's why Providence no longer exists today. We had a cholera epidemic. It was basically like any of those zombie movies you see. There were a lot of reports that people were pulling the canal lock when they want to get off the boat because people were walking around with their teeth falling out, loose skin, black fingernails. Nasty, very nasty in Providence. So much so that the people that were healthy left everything behind and set it on fire. Turned their back. We're done with it, we're going to burn it. So that's largely a huge portion of the downfall of Providence, Ohio. So the canal era seems really exciting, and it is a lot of fun. There was kind of a darker side to it also. Along with that also came a lot of robberies. We don't think about Northwest Ohio being the Wild West, but the canal belt was in the heart of it. 1850 through 1870, that's the same time period as the guys out west shooting up saloons. It happened here. The canal lock in Providence, so not too far away from here, was notorious for robberies. And when they would pull the boat up, they would actually stop it, let all the passengers out, and they had wagons that would go around the outskirts through the backside of Providence and Grand Rapids, Ohio, and they would reload the boat about 5 miles down. Because they knew the minute they pulled in those locks, young guys like myself, just like the movies, we pulled it in the end side, hop up on the canal lock, and turn the handguns down. Empty everything out in the center we wanted. So Providence was kind of a wild west town. So it was a pretty interesting place. Napoleon, I guess they were a little bit more sophisticated. They didn't quite have as many problems. So their development in Napoleon was based off of the canal, and they developed a lot of the milling industry. They had their woolen mills, and they had their other textile plants, and then they also had what would eventually become known as the Vokey Mill. So this is an image here from the canal era. I'm going to pass that around. And the issue with the milling industry was largely, it was based off of the water in the canal. You had to have a feeder, so the canal would drop the water through the mill, it would spin the turbines, and that's how you would get your energy and go back out in the river. So right off the bat, any energy we have in Northwest Ohio in the 1800s is thanks to the canal. So now the canal brings people in, it brings goods in, and now it brings power in. I have here, these are they're not brand new, but they're brand new to me. I just came across these a month ago. These are 2 original flour sacks from the mill in Florida, Ohio. So this mill was operated off of canal water, and it was purely by chance that I came across these. So this one here is for not being able to read upside down cornmeal, and this is your traditional flour. So there's a lot of farmers out there during the canal era. They need to take their grain somewhere, and they need to have flour produced. The mills were able to meet that necessity. So this is going to create an economic boom for Northwest Ohio. Today, the canal in Florida is still there. You can see it when you pass through. The water's still passing through there. The J.A. Andrew Mill that's set there, though, long gone. It's been gone for many years now. Are there any questions up until this point? I like talking a lot. It's kind of my job, right? So, I have a few other photos here of Napoleon. This one's really interesting. If anyone's following the Napoleon Civic Center project, say John L. Johnson Auditorium in Napoleon, John L. Johnson Auditorium at this time period in the canal era doesn't exist yet. And it would sit right just about up here on this bluff almost, right back here. And then these buildings are down in kind of more towards where there's the recycling center. That looks a little unsavory. Looked a little bit better back then, I suppose. These are all the early industries based off of the canal. So this is 24 coming through here. And if you've ever, has anybody ever passed by that one place where it's like a never-ending garage sale? There's always that sign in Napoleon that says sale or whatever. It's right along the river down from the fire department. No? It's like a staple in Napoleon. You should go sometime. That's about right, almost in its front yard. So you can take a look at this. And this, all this wood piled up is actually their milling and their wood industry. So if you're going to build something, you want to go to Napoleon.
Is there a sawmill there, or was that just storage?
There was a sawmill, flour mill, and woolen mill. This is a reversed image turned around the other way. Looking across, you can just make out the river in the background. This building here, this is, again, their woolen mills, textile mills. This is sitting where the city building is. And the Henry County Historical Society just put in a Ohio Historical Society marker on this site. So if you head downtown Napoleon, you can check that out. Pass another photo. This is the Miami-Dade Canal by moonlight, Napoleon, Ohio, and it should be looking towards Hawk's Pizza. So if you ever want to see it at night time, here's your opportunity. So along with the industry that would develop in Napoleon, that's the same across the board all along up and down the canals. Obviously, Grand Rapids has mills. It still has mills in use today. The Isaac Ledwin Mill being one of them. Downtown Toledo had a huge influx of people, so many that by 1859 they would have about 10,000 people in downtown Toledo. Likewise, the bottling and brewery industries would pick up in all up and down, all along the canal. You got a bunch of guys working on the canal. What do they need? They need alcohol, right? Can't drink the water anyway. It's dirty. They've been dumping their pee in it. So this here is the Tejan Heckler Company, Napoleon, Ohio. And then this bottle here, again, is the Heckler Company. That's Napoleon. And then this one is pretty cool. It says BG on it, B-E-E-G-E-E, like the band, you know, back in the day. And then on the bottom it says BG. This is from the Bowling Green Bottling Works, Bowling Green, Ohio. These three bottles here are really unique. Those were found at the bottom of the canal. So, and they were found in the bottom of the canal between Providence and right after the Henry County line. So you know for a fact that these came off a canal boat, drinking them, and the guys probably were tossing them off the roof of the canal as they were going. This bottle here is not from the canal, but I still brought it anyway. This is from the 1850s, 1860s, and that's more reminiscent of what their beer bottles and ginger bottles would have looked like during the time period. So again, just something that kind of cool to see. You can kind of picture the guys drinking their dark beer out of those instead. Another unique piece here, we have the canal here in Napoleon. It's kind of neat to see it colorized. This is the canal wrapping around a place that's now called River Park. So you can kind of see, if you've been through the River Park area, you can see the bend. You can tell right where that is.
They close the canal down in the wintertime?
Yes. So that's a really interesting part of the history. The canal boats were run by families typically. Husband, wife, and the kids would run a canal boat. It was their own kind of business and industry registered through the state of Ohio. And in the winter months, this is what helps the downfall of the canal. Once the railroads come in about 1860 here in northwest Ohio, the railroads could operate through the entire season. The canal boats would run as long as they could before the water froze. So once the water in the canal froze up, the business was done for the season. That also meant that once that water thawed out as close as they could get it, they had to break it up. Boy, they would break it up to get those boats started. So a lot of the stretches of canal, and there was an area right through Napoleon and into Florida, they would actually drain the canal, and the boats would sit right on the bottom bed of the canal, and the families would live in them during the winter months. So there's a huge loss of profit for the canal right off the bat. Once the railroads come in, they take that industry. And once you ride the railway the first time, you find out that it's faster. Might be a little bit more expensive, but I can travel pretty much anywhere in the United States I want to travel. And I don't have to worry about getting sick while doing it so much. So the railway is going to charge, starting about 1860, 13 cents per mile. Here's the difference though. I told you laundry services were available on the canal boat. Food's also available on the canal boat. You're not going to get food on the railway. You're on your own. Two other amenities with the canal boat that they had, being food and they had bedding. I brought along this quilt with me here, kind of reminiscent of quilts during the time period. You would have available bedding on the boat to bed down. On the railways, you're going to sleep sitting up. And if you don't like it, well, shut up or put up or get off. That's your problem. So a lot of the meals that were being provided on the canal boat, jumping back to that kind of provision that's given to you, a lot of the meals were really hearty. We're passing through northwest Ohio with a lot of corn, with wheat, flour products, milk products. So your meals were going to be really good. They were typically always prepared by the women. One interesting fact is the state of Ohio was actually stocking the canal with carp every season. Carp was available, and they encouraged fishing off the boat, and you could fish for free. No fishing licenses back then. Likewise, the animals that would burrow into the bank, those pesky muskrats. Do I have any guys out here that hunted muskrat or still hunt muskrat? Anybody? No hunters. Tough crowd. The muskrats through the state of Ohio, they would buy the furs off of the canal boats. So it was an incentive for you to shoot or trap the muskrats so they would not burrow into the bank, therefore draining the canal. Because the canal actually, in topography to the river, sets up higher in places. So all it takes is a muskrat to burrow through it, and it's going to drain the canal. So it was really common to trap those muskrats, make some good muskrat stew, and then once you pull into Cincinnati, exchange your furs over. Another thing that was really common on the canal boat was a meal called polecat. Has anybody had a polecat before? No? You sound like you've had it before. Oh, no?
I've heard that, though.
Okay. City slickers today call it skunk.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was kind of common on the canal boat every once in a while, and a lot of the canal boat captains had strict regulations that if you were going to be eating polecat on the boat, you had to eat it on the upper roof deck. You could not eat it down because it would trap the smell. So kind of interesting. So the railways that come in, they link Toledo all the way out to Cleveland. Cleveland, you can follow the railway all the way out to New York City or Philadelphia. Likewise, linking into Detroit or out to the West Coast. So the canal only can get you so far, and it's going to get you to Toledo to Cincinnati. If you want to link in, you can go a little bit into Indiana, or you can get off and link in and go to New York State itself, not New York City necessarily. So the railways have a very unique advantage, and also with that, they can cut across pretty much any part of the land that you want to cut across. Hence, McClure. So, yay, we're here, right? So, McClure itself is a pretty unique place because it kind of is in the middle of the Black Swamp, and not to sound offensive, but we are really out here in the middle of nowhere. Like, why are we here? What the heck? So there was really no reason to build McClure where it was built, except for the railroad cut through directly behind us here. It's very, very close. And you can see in this image here, I'll pop this out, we have an image of the downtown intersection here in McClure with the railways. So I'll pass that around for you to take a look at. And we are sitting in a little church right back here right now. Crossing and going in town. And you can tell it looks for the most part to be a pretty happening place. Lots of businesses, lots of growth. Just like the canal towns, once the railroad towns start popping up, they start adding hotels. There were hotels here, saloons. And we were just talking and reminiscing with some of the ladies here. What year did you say there were 35 businesses here? And what year still?
1934.
1934, there were still like 35 businesses here. So, not too long ago, really, when you think about it. So, John McClure plotted where we are right now. He broke it up into 28 lots in about 1880. So, that's a really unique developmental time period, too, because we are kind of well after the Civil War now. We're kind of moving past that time period of Reconstruction, and people are really excited about getting America back on track. The canal's still functioning, but the railways are able to take over. We're linking places together. The mill products, we're not just putting them on canal boats, we're putting them on trains and we're getting them out of here. We're making money and we're making it fast. So fast, people are coming here, they're clearing land and they're building those farms. So, if it wasn't for the canal, certainly the railways wouldn't have been here, and I can say that because nobody really would have known what was here to begin with. It would have taken a lot longer for the population to grow and a lot longer for people to get out of here. So, it kind of all goes back to the canal. But the problem is, by about 1860, 1870, the railway is decimating the canal. They're taking their business, they're offering further transportation, they're offering further routes at cheaper rates and at faster rates. You know how technology changes. They say every 6 months in America, the technology of then is obsolete. Every 6 months, our technology changes. Same with the railway industry. So, what's the final moment when the canal just dies? In 1913, the Great Flood takes place here in the state of Ohio. And down along the Ohio River, it was said there was a Native American walking, and the water was already rising. And the canal boat captain said, how high does the water really get here on the Ohio River? And they knew it got high. And an Indian was standing there, this native person, and he pointed up and he said, "Do you see the top branches of this oak tree?" And they said, "Yeah." And he says, "That's how high this water's going to get." And the canal boat captain said, "I don't even know why I asked you. You're not educated, you're a native, you're an Indian." Got on his boat, off he went. And guess what? The water passed the top of that tree, that branch. The state of Ohio would have such a dramatic time and a horrible conflict with this flood that they had put so much money into the canal. In 1913, that flood water bursts the banks of the Maumee River and it takes out the towpath. The towpath path again is where the mules are, so they can't hold boats. So the state of Ohio has a decision to make. Are we gonna spend even more money putting these towpath trails back in for these mules for a system that we're already in the red, we're not doing well? The railroads are here to stay, they're doing much better than the canal, we're gonna put the money into it. And the state of Ohio votes and decides the canal days are over. We're done. So there were sections that stayed intact. There was a section in Grand Rapids, there was a section in Defiance, and there was a small sliver of it in Toledo. At that point, it's just used for transporting goods, not really many people. If people are using these small stretches for transportation, it's for one unique reason, and it's for their honeymoons. There's this weird thing. People were like getting sick and dying on canal boats in the 1800s, and then by like the early 1900s, the teens, and into the 20s, people were like, oh, canal boats, that's such a cute little ride, let's go on it for our honeymoon. So, up until 1922, those sections of canals operate, and in 1923 in Napoleon, they dynamite the canal, and they fill it in, and they build the highway. So, and that kind of closes off the history for the canal. For the railways, they continue to develop all the way into the mid-1900s. We see where they're linking towns together, villages together. Okolona is built up around a railway, and the reason Okolona is where it was or why it has its name, Okolona is talking about the oak trees that were there. It was in a large oak grove. Once the railway comes in, they say, finally, we cut these oak trees down, put them on some trains and ship them out of here. And it's really interesting because there are ships in New York and in specifically Philadelphia that have been dug up and unearthed. And they've said this lumber seems to be from like Northwest Ohio. They've been able to track it. And we know without a doubt, historians today, there are ships that were used along the coast of New York City that the masts were made from trees in Oklahoma, Ohio. So it's really kind of cool. It's really interesting. So the railways link everything together. They're really important for the development, and the railways would serve to continue to grow from Northwest Ohio. Now, the railway's not here though anymore, is it, in McClure? And we were talking about how, and she said, you know, when the railways tore out of McClure, you said that you saw a dramatic, difference in the economics here. Businesses started to leave. People weren't around as much anymore. Kind of want to point something out that concerns me. The canal brought businesses in, and canal towns popped up. Canal goes away, and it's replaced by railways. Railway towns pop up. Then the car comes in. Here's the car dealership in downtown Napoleon in the early 1900s. The building's still there, just lop off the top 2 stories. It sits directly across from Steiner Chevrolet. It's the Maumee Valley Restoration Building. So, the cars come in, they build highways. The highways follow the canal trails and the railroad trails. Well, now what have we done? We've seen where they've taken the highway, they've moved it out now to a bunch of fields. We've built a new 24. So now we're bypassing all of these smaller railroad towns and the canal towns that were here. So it'll be really interesting to see in 5 or 10 more years how that, changes the economic status of some of these smaller towns. It's just progression. So, what's next after that? Flying cars, probably. So at this time, I want to open up the floor for any questions you have about the Miami-Dade Canal, the railways, Northwest Ohio, any.
How were they dug? No.
The canals were dug, again, starting in 1825. They were dug by Irish and German immigrants. And those immigrants were coming over looking for work, and the canal served that need for them because they could get paid an astonishing 25 cents a day. 25 cents a day for those Irish and German immigrants. There was a lot of interesting racism that went along with the Irish. They didn't always get along too well. And that actually kind of hit a peak in Napoleon. The big water tower in Napoleon that says Napoleon on it actually sits on top of lot 111 or 111. And that was the Irish and German cemetery for the canal. For every stretch, 1 mile stretch of the canal you drive, about 2 workers died while digging it. Those unmarked graves are still there along those canal stretches today. In Napoleon, those unmarked graves sit underneath our water tower. So drink up, everybody. The city of Napoleon said most of those graves, or all of those graves, were moved to Glenwood Cemetery. But if you go take a walk, you're not going to find any tombstones that say like canal worker or Irish immigrant or German. So I'm not quite sure where they're buried in Glenwood Cemetery, or maybe if they're even over there. But that was Napoleon's first cemetery, was the water, under the water tower. So yeah, German and Irish immigrants all the way from Toledo to Cincinnati done it. The stretch that we sit on, that was our development here through Napoleon, through Providence, was completed in 1838 about. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm interested in the grade. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, how, did they just more or less make it level and then the water would do its thing, or was there a certain amount of grade to it
Yeah,
that keep the water flowing down
Yeah.
the river?
sure. The canal itself actually cuts down, like I said, the banks themselves fluctuate anywhere from about 5 to 10 or more feet down to a flat bottom. And there's no grade to it. It's flat all the way across. And the way the water would also be elevated or changed was not through the locks. There were actually a series of reservoirs that would let water in that you could control. And I will tell you from my experience on the canal this summer, that is a pain in the butt. And I will tell you it's frustrating for us because we operate the canal in Grand Rapids the same way. And daily, it was astonishing how the water, when we left that day, would be maybe 6 inches higher. Where did it go? Well, it leaked down, it went back into the river, it fluctuated nightly. And then when it rained, it was a nightmare. The water, when we had quite a bit of rain at one point this summer, and it moved the level of the water 1.5 feet. And what we did to help change it, and this would have been really interesting to see, and at the mill, we fired up all the saws and all the steam power, and we ran the mill on overdrive the entire time we worked. We weren't even cutting anything. There were like big table saws spinning, and we were doing that to suck as much water into the mill and push it back out in the river because we were on like overload. The whaler gates on the canal, were just a few feet from it like flowing over. So we just burnt the water as quick as we could. And the Isaac Liquid Mill can burn about 32,000 gallons of water per minute when we're powering everything. So once we fired everything up, the water was just surging out. So it's pretty cool.
So what was the depth they maintained it at?
They tried to maintain it at 4 feet. And it's really interesting because the canal in Grand Rapids today is U.S. Coast Guard certified. We have lifeboats or life jackets for everybody. But the joke behind it always is when the little kids get scared, if we sank, you'd literally be able to walk under the roof and stand up there because the boat is going to sit in the water. So 4 feet was usually about standard. Once you hit some of the more southern areas, it would go sometimes to about 8 feet. But they tried to keep it pretty average because they didn't want to bump the bottom and hang the boats up. Yes?
Schools have changed a lot too. We used to have one-room schools, and each town would have their school. And now there's a lot of busing. It's changed a lot.
Yeah, transportation is really interesting, and I think largely we overlook the dramatic impact the canal and the railroad and busing of cars have had on our daily life. We kind of maybe take it for granted, and we don't realize that, those cultural things that were a part of our society, with transportation, you kind of lose that a little bit. The idea of the one-room schoolhouse where you knew everybody and you knew your teacher disappears when you have the advantage of loading kids onto a truck for children and you ship them off to their school miles away. McCleary, we know that. You lost your school. I'm not quite sure what year the school was switched over to Napoleon, but look how far your students are taken from here to get to Napoleon. So, what other questions? Yeah, in the back, sir.
I got a couple questions here.
Okay.
How much was that per mile?
3 cents on the canal per mile.
Okay, I read that it was 3 cents a mile, and then there was so much per ton. How's that work?
Okay, so much per ton was obviously if you're shipping goods. And the main goods that were shipped on this section of the canal were tin, shoes, fabrics, any kind of textile, coming usually from Toledo or those areas. So there would be weigh stations, just like we think with semis today. They would weigh, everything would come in crates. This is obviously a much smaller version. The crates that were actually being put on these boats were like the size of this table. Big things that were lowered in by cranes. And that's why in that image I passed around, you saw these open air parts of the boat, and that's so they could drop that cargo in. So the first thing you're going to do before they put the crate on the boat is they're going to weigh it. So then they would know how much to charge the person. Now, with a bunch of alcohol involved and the fact that the water levels fluctuated, that was also a way to scam customers, because once the crates got on the boat, if the boat captain felt it sank down too low, they would go, oh, our scales were off, our boat actually dropped in a foot and a half in the water. We need a little extra money to compensate for that.
Oh, geez.
So it'd be 2 or 3 cents a mile, plus the tonnage,
Yeah.
Yes,
whatever weight on the boat. The boat
right.
wouldn't be a per mile.
Only per mile for the passengers, but businessmen or anything of that nature, yeah. And it's really interesting too, because with that cargo also comes the shipping of animals, which gets into a really kind of gray area, because they're animals, but yet they're cargo. So you saw boat captains charging for the animal by the head, but yet then they would turn around and say, well, since you're going to be possibly selling this at market, it is technically also under cargo, so we need to weigh the animals also. Well, you can imagine if you're in charge of like herding cows or something, you're going to be pretty ticked off that you have to take a canal boat as if you were dealing with chickens. The boat captains, and it was the same for trains, but you know, some of those boat captains were pretty stingy people. I mean, get them on the boat, shut up, sit down. You're on the boat now, you can't complain.
Was it an individual boat that had their own rules, or did everybody have the same?
When it came to the speed limit, not bumping the canal locks, and waiting your turn to go through the locks, there were standard procedure or protocol set by the state of Ohio.
But I mean tribal.
But-
Each boat had their own?
But yeah, but once you got on the boat, it was up to the boat captain. Yeah, it was up to the boat captain. So that's again why, like I said, it had to have been a sight to see. Some of these, when you got to Cincinnati, you might sit in Cincinnati for an entire day just waiting to get your boat through the system of locks, because the boats will be backed up so far. Think about driving downtown Toledo. Our cars sit at traffic lights for a considerable amount of time. Now you have a 30-foot boat, you're trying to get through a lock, and there's all these other boats waiting. There were a lot of upset people.
Oh, yeah.
So, and the captains would be the first ones to be like, oh, you let his boat through and not mine. Or what happens if I'm a really good friend of the lock keeper and I just slip them some extra money and now I'm going to let my boat through first. And
So the big stick comes in.
yeah, the big stick comes in, the pike pole, yeah. So it just kind of continues around and around and around. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Where's the church in Providence?
The church in Providence sits just off the road. If you were coming in from the Henry County line, it's on your left-hand side and is marked by an Ohio Historical Society marker. And it is the oldest church in the Toledo Diocese today. So that dates back to the 1830s. So that's a really neat church. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you're familiar with the church I'm talking about. Again, it is on your left-hand side coming out of Henry County. There's a row of trees in front of it. That row of trees is the downtown center main street of where Providence was. Those are the main street trees that the ladies would have been like walking under in the shop. So that's where downtown was.
What's the name of the church now?
I knew you were going to ask that.
St.
Saint-
Patrick's?
St. Patrick's, that's it. It's been a while. It's been since summer since somebody's asked me. Yeah, St. Patrick's. Yeah, you're right. And Peter Manure's house sits just across the road from it. Peter Manure's house is still there. And that is one of the oldest houses, homes, this side of the Long River. So it's a pretty old place, 1830s also. So the Isaac Ledway Mill, fun fact also, still mills flour and everything today the exact same way since the first day the doors opened, which means it's one of about 3 mills actually in America that still produces flour the same traditional way from the day they opened their doors in the 1830s. So you got the only fully functioning canal lock that still takes people in, and you got one of the last few remaining mills that still function off of canal water with the stones in the whole pit. So we're pretty blessed to have it. It's an awesome thing that we have here. So yes.
I don't expect you to be a genius about that church, but it sure doesn't look that old, did it?
Correct. It's been added onto a couple of times. It was much smaller. Actually, the center part is the original. And if you drive down the back side of it, see, and that's why people, when they drive down the country road that breaks off, they can't understand why the church is facing the wrong way. Well, it's because the church is facing what was Main Street, which is now the parking lot. So if you look at the back of the church, you can tell it's the original old brick that was made on site. The wings were then built off, and then I believe they did build out the front also. And it's like most churches. I don't know about this one, if it's been added onto or not. It hasn't yet. So you start with the core, and then it just fans out. So, yeah. Any other questions? if you have questions afterwards, feel free to come and look at any of the photos. I have a few books up here. I have this Ohio Historical Society book flipped open to McClure's history, a little bit about the Plains Canal systems. Feel free to take a look at anything if you have any more questions. I want to thank the McClure Historical Society for having me out again. It's my 4th time. I love coming here. I get so excited about it. I taught all day in Toledo. Talking, and I was still excited to come here. So I haven't lost my excitement yet for history. So thank you so much for having me, and I hope to see you again soon, everybody. So thank you.
Help yourself to coffee and cookies.
2 cents a mile. People.
I'll take this.